In the previous lesson, we covered the fillet sketch tool. Now we're going to cover the chamfer sketch tool. And when you look at the sketch ribbon, you will see chamfer is on the drop-down list right below fillet. And the reason for that is, fillet and chamfer are closely related. A fillet places a radius in the corner, where a chamfer will place a bevel in the corner. Before we begin, if you would like to work along with me, go into your Working Files folder and open the part file called chamfers. And you should see this image on your screen. So I'm going to go ahead and select chamfer. Property Manager opens, and notice I only have a couple options here. Distance, and angle distance. This is how you specify the size of the chamfer. Notice by default we have equal distance checked. And currently the chamfer is at 10 millimeters. So leaving this at distance, and equal distance, and going out to the screen and selecting a vertex. And if I zoom up on this, you will see I have a bevel in the corner, 10 by 10. Now that's a distance. Also notice the red chain link. That means these two dimensions are linked. So if I change one, the second one updates automatically to the same size. Now if I uncheck equal distance, notice I have two windows, one for distance 1 and a second one for distance 2. So I'm going to put 20 millimeters for distance 2. I'm going to go out to the screen. The first line that you select, distance 1 will be applied to that line. And then the second line will have the distance 2 applied to it. And if I zoom up, you see the 10, distance 1, and the 20 for distance 2. Now let's try the angle distance option. This allows you to specify one of the legs and the angle. I'm going to change this angle to 60 degrees. I'm going to go out to the screen. The first line I select will receive the distance 1 of 10 millimeters. So I'm going to select this line and then this line. I'll zoom up on that and notice the 10 by 60 degrees. You may have also noticed we have an undo button. SolidWorks provides you a way to undo the chamfer and try it again. In this sketching lesson, we are going to cover the first of the Sketch Modify tools. We'll cover two of them, Trim Entities and Extend Entities. But first, if you would like to work along with me, go into your Working Files folder and open the part name, Trim and Extend, and you'll see the same sketch geometry on your screen. So let's begin. I'm going to select Trim Entities. Property Manager opens, giving me 5 options for trimming geometry on the screen. The first one is Power Trim. Now this is a very common one that a lot of people like to use. You simply go out to the screen, hold down the left mouse button, notice a spline is being created on the screen, and as that spline passes through geometry, that geometry is being trimmed back to the next closest piece of geometry. Notice how this works. I am going to undo this so we can move on to the next option, Corner Trim. Now you want to pay particular attention to the graphic here. The two pieces of geometry that you select are the two pieces that are kept, and everything else is trimmed back to those two pieces of geometry. So for example, if I select this line here and this line, these two lines will be trimmed back. So I'll select here and then here. Then I'll select here and then here, and these two are trimmed back. Once again, I'll undo, go back into the Trim Entities, and the third option is Trim Away Inside. This allows you to select two cutting edges. So for example, if I select this line here and this line here, anything that I select inside of these two lines will be trimmed to those lines. So notice how this line is being trimmed back to the two cutting edges. Once again, I'll undo, return to the Trim Entities command, and notice our fourth option is just the opposite of the third option, Trim Away Inside, Trim Away Outside. So if I go to trim away outside, if I select the same two pieces of geometry, everything I select after that will be trimmed to the outside. Okay, we'll undo. Once again, go back into Trim Entities, and the last option, Trim to Closest. This allows you to go out to the drawing screen, and when you select a piece of geometry, that will be trimmed back to the next closest piece of geometry. So notice if I select here, it'll be trimmed back to this line and this line. Or if I select inside of this circle, this line will be trimmed back to the circle. Now, covering the Trim Entities command in a classroom setting, I see that students favor the Power Trim and Trim to Closest. Those seem to be the two favorites. Once again, I will undo. And now let's try the Extend command. Extend Entities. No property manager is displayed. You simply go out to your screen, and the geometry that you select will be extended to the next nearest piece of geometry. In this lesson, we are going to cover a command called Offset Entities. But before we do that, if you want to work along with me, go into your Working Files folder and open the part name called Offset Entities. And once you open it, you should see a line, arc, circle, and a closed profile just like you see on your screen in the lessons. So let's begin. I'm going to go to Offset Entities, and the Property Manager opens. The very first window allows me to specify an offset distance. It's currently at 10 millimeters. I'm going to go out to the screen and select this first line here. Notice the line is offset to the bottom side of the original geometry. If I want to offset it to the other side, I can either select anywhere in this area or go back to the Property Manager and put a check mark in the reverse box. I can also add dimensions. So when I close out of the Offset Entities Property Manager, a dimension of 10 millimeters is added between those two pieces of geometry. I'm going to go back into Offset Entities, and this time I'm going to come down to the Closed Profile, and if I select a line, only one line is offset. I'm going to go ahead and reverse that direction so it's offset to the outside. Because these lines are chained together, if I go back to the Property Manager and put a check mark in the Select Chain box, notice it will offset that entire profile. I'm going to go ahead and close out of it, go back into Offset Entities, and this time I'll select the arc. Now notice the arc is offset to the outside. I do have an option for bidirectional. This will offset to both the outside and inside of the original geometry. And because this new geometry is open-ended, I do have the option to add end caps, either arcs or lines. And I also have the option to make the original geometry construction lines. So if I place a check mark for Make Base Construction, and then close out of the Offset Entities Property Manager, notice the original geometry is now a construction line. I'm going to go back into Offset Entities one more time and show you that we can do the same with a circle. We're adding dimensions, bidirectional, and making the original geometry construction line. In this lesson, we are going to look at an intermediate sketch tool called Convert Entities. Now this particular tool is a big time saver. But before we get into how this works, let's talk about what we have on the screen. On the screen you see a 3D model and a reference plane. Up to this point, we have not covered either of these. Unfortunately, I was required to create a 3D model and a reference plane in order to discuss Convert Entities. So if you would like to work along with me, go into your Working Files folder and open the part called Convert Entities. So let's begin. What is Convert Entities? Convert Entities allows you to take existing geometry and project it onto your current sketch plane. So what is the benefit of that? Well, it saves you time redrawing geometry which already exists in the model. Let's take a look at how to do it. I'm going to start a new sketch, and I'm going to create my new sketch on this plane 1. So I'll select plane 1, and then I'll go to Convert Entities. A simple Property Manager opens. I'll go back to the screen and select this edge of the part. I want to bring this edge into my current sketch. I'll roll the model, grab this back edge. Notice in the Property Manager, I have all 4 edges. I'm going to go ahead and click the green check mark. And notice that profile was projected onto my current sketch plane. Also notice that all of the lines are black, and it says fully defined for this sketch. However, we don't see any smart dimensions, and we don't see any geometric relations that we recognize. We just see these 4 here that we haven't seen before. These relations are called on edge. Now, what does that mean? Well, that simply means if you update this original geometry that this sketch was created from, this sketch here will update with it. So let's give that a try. I'm going to close out of the current sketch. I'm going to go back to my Property Manager, expand the Boss Extrude 1, and then edit the sketch that was used to create the original profile. I'll edit the sketch. Let's change this number here to 100. And we'll also change this center to center distance to 100. The original geometry updates. When I close out of the sketch, you'll see the sketch created on this reference plane is also updated. To verify that, I can go to a top view, and you'll see the 2 are on top of one another. Now that we covered many different ways to pattern features, let's change gears and try our hand at a different type of intermediate SolidWorks command. This command is called rib. And what we want to do is take the part that we see on the screen and create a rib between these 2 cylinders, create a second rib between these 2 perpendicular faces, and create a rib inside of this box. Now, if you want to work along with me, just go into your Work in Files folder and open the part file named ribs. So let's begin. I am going to go to the rib command found on the Features ribbon. Property Manager opens, prompting me for a plane, a planar face, or an edge on which to create a sketch. Since we want to begin with the 2 cylinders, I am going to select this top face here. As soon as I select the face, I am taken into the sketch ribbon, and I am going to create a line between the 2 cylinders. I'll snap from this quadrant point to this quadrant point. Once my sketch is created, I'll close out of the sketch. Property Manager for the rib now opens. Now on the screen, I see a preview of 2 yellow lines here, and then I see an arrow. And this arrow is pointing in the direction for the new rib. Now this arrow is pointing in the wrong direction. I want the arrow to be pointing in a downward direction. So I'm going to go back to the Property Manager, and under Extrusion Direction, I will select Normal to Sketch. Now if the arrow was pointing upward instead of downward, I would simply check or uncheck the Flip Material Side box. Going back to the screen, notice the 2 yellow lines outside of the original sketch line. That's because my thickness is being applied to both sides, and my thickness is currently set at 10 millimeters. So that is 5 millimeters on each side of my sketch line. I can change it to first side. Notice the preview update on the screen, or I can select second side. Again, notice the preview update. I am going to put it back to both sides. I can also apply a draft angle to the rib. So if I select draft and type in an angle of 5 degrees, I can have it draft outward or inward. I'm going to leave it at outward so the rib gets larger as it nears the bottom of the cylinders. I'm going to close out of the rib Property Manager, and notice I have a rib on the screen and it's wider at the bottom of the rib. Okay, now let's try a second rib between these 2 perpendicular faces. I'm going to go back into the rib command. I have the same message. This time, I am going to expand the Feature Manager tree and select the front plane. Now notice the front plane on the preview on the screen. So I'm going to select front plane. I'm back in my sketch ribbon. I'm going to create a line from this edge, and I'm just going to pick a point along this top surface. And notice if I roll apart, I am sketching on that front plane. I'm just keeping this view here so these other features don't hide our sketch. I'm going to close out of the sketch. Once again, the property manager opens for the rib, and notice the arrow is pointing in the correct direction. So I'm simply going to click the green check mark, and I now have a rib between those two perpendicular faces. The third rib that we're going to create is going to be inside of this box here. But before we do that, notice the model consisted of plane 1. I am going to show this plane 1. This plane 1 was created parallel to this bottom face, which is a top plane, and 30 millimeters above it. And we're going to create our new rib on this plane. So I'm going to go into the rib command a third time. I'll select plane 1 as my sketch plane. And let's view normal to the sketch plane. And I'm going to go into the line command and just draw 3 lines randomly, just to show you how versatile this rib command is. I'm going to close out of the sketch. Let's go back to an isometric view and zoom up on the box. Now, if we look at the arrow, it is pointing in an outward direction. Now, I'm going to leave it in that direction and close out of the rib 3 command. And notice the preview. It basically adds a shelf inside of that box. I am going to edit rib 3. Let's change the direction of the arrow. Close out of rib 3. And once again, notice the preview. Let's edit the rib 3 one last time. And this time, we will create the rib normal to the sketch. Now, it looks like the arrow is going in the wrong direction. So I'm going to go back to Property Manager and uncheck Flip Material Side. I'll close out of rib 3. And I now have a rib normal to the sketch. So you can see just how versatile this rib command actually is. Now we're going to cover a command called Hole Wizard. But before we do that, go into a new sketch and create a rectangle and extrude it any height. And you'll have the same part you see on your screen. If you don't want to do that, you can simply go into your Working Files folder and open the part file named Hole Wizard. But again, this is nothing more than a rectangle extruded. So let's begin. I am going to activate the Hole Wizard command, and the Property Manager opens. Notice we have 2 tabs, one for the type of hole and one to position the hole. We'll begin with type. As we scroll through the Property Manager, at first glance, it looks to be overwhelming. But there's no need to be overwhelmed because a lot of the settings that we choose early on propagate the fields lower in the Property Manager. Let's begin with hole type. In SolidWorks 2014, SolidWorks updated these 9 graphics. Before SolidWorks 2014, these were nothing more than 2D pictures. Also, in SolidWorks 2014, we have 3 new hole types. We have counterbore slot, countersink slot, and slot. We're going to begin with counterbore. Now, once we select the hole type counterbore, we then need to select the standard. We are going to go with ANSI metric. Next will be the type of fastener. And we're going to go with a hex head cap screw. Right below this, under hole specifications, we need to choose the hole size. And we're going to select an M30. And then we have the fit. Our choices are normal, close, or loose. And this goes back to your drafting standards for the type of fit, class 1, 2, or 3 type of fit. We're going to go with normal, which is a class 2. The next item in the Property Manager is end condition. Many of these you'll recognize. Blind, through all, up to next. We're going to go with through all. And then we have options. These fields are populated based on what we selected above. We're going to leave these options as is, and then switch over to the Position tab. Now, under the Position tab, I can either select a single face and then position the hole multiple times along that face. Or if I select the 3D sketch button, I can position that hole on multiple faces. I am simply going to select the top face, and as soon as I do that, my pointer turns into the point tool, which allows me to specify a point to position the hole. Now notice as I move my cursor, I can position additional hole features. I'm going to instead hit the escape key and then view normal to the face. And at this time, I can apply geometric relations and smart dimensions for the hole position. So we'll apply a dimension of 75 and another dimension of 100. I'll close out of dimension, close out of the Hole Wizard Property Manager, and notice we have a counterboard feature. Now let's take a look at the Feature Manager tree. We have the feature for Hole Wizard, but if we expand it, we have two sketches. The first sketch is for the hole position. If you want to change the hole position, simply edit the sketch. The second sketch is for the profile or the shape of the hole feature. Do not edit this sketch. Instead, edit the feature and make your changes through the Property Manager. So you can edit the sketch for the hole position, but don't edit the sketch for the hole profile. Let's create another Hole Wizard feature. This time, we're going to go with a straight tap. Once again, our standard is going to be anti-metric. We'll use a bottoming tapped hole. And this time, we're going to use a size of M36 by 3.0. We want it to go through all, and the same with the thread. Now, right below this, under Options, we can simply have a tap drill diameter, or we can have a cosmetic thread, or no cosmetic thread. We're going to go with cosmetic thread. I'm going to go back to the top of the Property Manager, select the Position tab, go out to the screen, select this face, and position it. I'm going to close out of the Hole Wizard command, and when I zoom up on this, notice we do not see any threads. Now the reason for that is, in the options, cosmetic threads is not turned on. So let's go up to the options. The dialog box appears on the screen. We'll change the Document Properties tab, go to Detailing, and you want to verify cosmetic threads is checked, along with shaded cosmetic threads. Select OK. And now notice we see cosmetic threads in that hole. Now these are nothing more than a graphic representation of threads. And in SolidWorks we call these cosmetic threads. These are not true threads cut into the cylinder of that feature. They're nothing more than a graphic representation. In the next 3 lessons, we are going to cover reference geometry. And we're going to use the same model for all 3 lessons. And this model can be found in your Working Files folder under the part name Reference Geometry. Now, reference geometry can be found in the Features ribbon. To the far right, notice Reference Geometry. If I expand it, we have reference planes, axes, coordinate systems, points, center of mass, and mate reference. The 3 that we're going to cover are plane, axis, and coordinate system. But before we cover them, let's talk about why you need reference geometry. You will find as your parts become more complex that when you go to create a sketch, the 3 primary planes or the existing faces that make up your part are not the correct face for your new sketch. You desire something in addition to this, maybe a plane parallel to the incline face, or a plane running down the middle of the part. This is where reference geometry comes into play. So let's begin. I am going to select the drop-down reference geometry and then select plane. The Property Manager opens, and at the very top of the Property Manager, I have a message. Below this, we have 3 reference windows, first, second, and third. Notice the first one is already highlighted, So I'm going to go out to the screen and select the front face. Now you also notice once I select the front face that a preview of a reference plane is displayed on the screen. And if we go back to the property manager, notice the message window has changed to green in color and fully defined. That's a good sign. If you see red, that means you've selected incompatible geometry. Moving down the property manager, you'll also notice that the first reference window has expanded. We now have parallel, perpendicular, coincident, angle, and distance. And notice distance is the one that is currently selected. Since distance is selected, let's try this one first. I can increase and decrease the distance by selecting the up-down arrows, or I can key in a value in this window. I can also flip the direction of it, and notice the preview on the screen. It's now on the opposite side of the face. I can also increase the number of planes, and if I close out of the property manager, I have 3 new planes on the drawing. If I close out of the property manager, you will see 3 planes in the feature manager tree. So let's undo this. We'll remove those 3 planes, and let's go back into reference geometry and then plane. Now we're going to try selecting something different for first reference. Let's select the inclined face. As soon as I select inclined face, notice once again, I am at the offset distance option. However, I could change it to parallel. And notice with parallel, it places it parallel, but on the opposite side. Now notice with parallel, I don't have any value that I can input for how far this parallel plane is away from this inclined surface. However, I do have a second reference window, which is highlighted. So let's say, for example, I want to be parallel to the inclined face, but I want this new plane to run through this edge here. So I'm going to select this edge as my second reference. And now notice we have a plane parallel to the inclined face running through that edge. I am going to clear the second reference and clear the face. And now let's try another option. Let's create a plane perpendicular to this face. So I'll select this face as my first reference. I'll then select perpendicular. And then for my second reference, I want the perpendicular plane to run through this edge. So I'll select this edge. And even though the plane is displaying below the model, remember planes are indefinite in size, so they can be expanded. So for example, if I close out of the property manager, I can grab these corners and increase the size of it. While it's not necessary that I do that, some people like to expand their planes just so they can see where they're working. I am going to undo again and one more time. Let's go back into reference geometry, go to plane, and this time we are going to select this front face for our first reference. And again, it takes us to the distance option. However, for the second reference, I am going to select this opposite face. And you'll notice in the property manager, it immediately switches me over to midplane, which is a very common reference plane option. Now I have a plane halfway between this face and the back face. Let's go ahead and clear the second reference and the first reference. And now let's try angle. So I'm going to select this as my first reference. For my second reference, we'll select this edge here. And then we'll go back and select angle and type an angle of 45 degrees. Now, if that 45 degrees was meant to be 45 degrees in this direction on the top side of the inclined surface, we do have a flip checkbox. And notice it flipped it, and now we're 45 degrees between these two planes. Now, before we conclude this lesson, I am going to clear the window references one more time. And I want to show you just some of the capability of this reference plane. I can select this vertex for my first reference, this one for my second reference, and this one for my third reference. And notice how we created a plane through those 3 vertex points. So you have a lot of possibilities when creating reference planes.